Welcome, everyone. Thanks for attending this session on the results from the Digital Design Sustainability Survey. So just going into the results, before going into the results themselves, I was struck by this study by the IEA that came out in the last couple of days, and it said basically to achieve net zero by 2050, children born today must emit 10 times less carbon during their lifetimes than their grandparents do. So that's quite extraordinary when you actually think about it. And when we look at the broader implications of that, it is that, we have to use things less or use technology less or create most of the CO2 we're creating is through the use of devices, either the purchase of or the actual use of technological devices. And how do we reduce that activity by 90%? It's an enormous challenge. So this survey was basically trying to understand, going out to digital professionals, designers, usability experts, content professionals, developers, and asking them, for a more sustainable digital design, what's most important to you? It ran for about a little over a month, and we had 545 valid responses, which was excellent. For this sort of study, we look for about 400, so we're very happy with the response rate. So it was a top task type of survey, which I'll explain in a bit more detail the mechanics of it in a few minutes. But part of top task is to build a task list, or to develop, define what is the environment of sustainable digital design, and to help understand, well, what are all the things that could matter in the world of sustainable digital design. I spent a number of months researching and talking to people and in discussions, and also going out there on the web and going to places like the Sustainable Web Manifesto and seeing, well, what sort of principles and statements were there, and pulling all these into a singular list. So inspiration from the Sustainable Web Manifesto, from principle of sustainable software engineering. So looking for principles in the area of sustainability in digital. And in the general design area, this was a very interesting set of principles I came across by the Design Justice Network, and some very good principles that I was able to add to the list. And here from Organic Basics, a low impact manifesto. What should a low impact website have? So this is just a sample of the basic research that was done, and it all came together to create this list, which has about 65 statements on it. So basically these are, as a result of months research, all the things that could matter, could be important in relation to sustainable digital design. Account for waste at every step from true beginning to true end, avoid the false economies, free and cheap, reduce consumption through design, change over consumption behaviors, send least amount of data possible. So all these issues that might reduce the impact of sustainable digital design. Here's the results, or the first look at the actual results. So basically you're going to see quite a few colors as we go through this. Yellow is what we call the top task, is the first 25% of the actual vote. Green are important tasks. They're the next 25% of the vote. And then we got turquoise, which is 50 to 75. And then if it's white, it's out in the final 25% of the vote. So basically we see this is a stabilization chart, which is trying to see, well, was the data consistent? Did it stabilize? So 500 or so voters, so roughly at about 150 as a quarter, 140 or so in the process. And now if we're looking across here and we're seeing lots of fluctuation in colours, we'd be worried that consensus has not emerged in the actual data. But we can see here that certainly from about half of the vote, so the first quarter it varied a fair bit, but basically after about 150 voters, it really began to stabilize and the patterns began to emerge. And the top tasks that have emerged, solve deep needs, not superficial wants, promote long-term thinking, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, and make things easy to be found and reused. So these are the top three. Everything created must have an owner who is responsible to care, maintain, and delete it. Reduce consumption through design, change overconsumption behaviors, calculate true and total cost, the cost to the ecosystem, center the voices of those who are directly impacted by the outcomes of the product, service, or process. And finally, in the top task family, continuous improvement, governance, ongoing optimization. So we see here, this is the classical top task environment. We've done these studies about 600 times, and we always get this type of pie chart or this type of pattern. So certain tasks get significantly more of the vote than other tasks get. So here, the top 8 tasks got as much as the vote as the bottom 33 tasks. So it gives us a sense of prioritization. And it's not to say that the stuff at the bottom is not important, but there's a consensus about these are the things we need to do first, or these are the things we need to focus on first in the actual process. So just a quick look at what's at the bottom of the list. So we see here the last thing, the thing that didn't resonate, encourage people to use product services during periods of low energy demand. That just got 4 votes out of 2,680 cast. Mimic biological systems. Least amount of materials and tools possible. Just got 8 votes. So it's not to say that these things are not important in a certain context, but there's the solve deep needs, not superficial wants, promote long-term thinking, 10, 20 years, 50 years, make things easy to be found, reuse. The first 2, you might say, are quite philosophical and maybe impossible in the world that we actually live in, or they certainly feel impossible within most of the organizations we exist within. But maybe the third is something really practical that we could actually do. So I'm going to look at these in a little bit more detail. So what I did was I spent quite a bit of time classifying and organizing how the patterns of the vote had actually gone to break them into a series of distinct areas or principal areas or planets, maybe in the Earth experience. And the broad overall, resonance of short-term thinking. Now here's where we are. If we wanted to summarize our world, short-term thinking, selling superficial wants. How do we get to long-term thinking, solving deep needs? And there will be time for the discussion at the end of this session. If anyone has any ideas around this, love to hear them, or further questions that you want to ask in the process. So this idea, that I have around, the Earth experience, that the broader sense that digital sustainability or sustainability in digital needs us to move beyond the thinking of user experience or customer experience to really taking in the Earth experience. So I went through all the data and the voting patterns, and I segmented them and classified them based on the order of voting and the grouping, etc., statistical grouping that was actually occurring. And I came up with basically 3 major planetary areas or areas that we need to be thinking about as designers or content professionals. The first one seems, fluffy to some degree, wisdom, but we're going to deal with that, about truth, about nature, and about what it is to be human. So maybe the first one you could say is quite philosophical, and we're saying, well, do we have time for philosophy in this day and age? But probably without truth, we are lost, as we'll see as we dig into this data. So the next is around worth. Really, and these are the top tasks, the long term. We're building these things that just last, for 2 years, and then they're worthless, and they create all sorts of waste. And the deep needs, how do we understand deep needs? How do we know the difference between deep needs and superficial wants? And then the metrics. How do we measure worth? Because the old metrics, the metrics of volume, or the metrics of growth or gross domestic product, these are the metrics that are driving us to the precipice, driving us down the track to a climate Armageddon. So here we got wisdom and we got worth. And the other area, waste or zero waste, that so much of what we see in digital and so many other environments is we create massive quantities of waste as we create this world that we currently live in and exist within. And in the areas of waste, there are 4 sections. Maintain, so it's about getting to zero waste. So maintain, reuse, and less energy. So what are the strategies around less energy and less data? So less data, how do we use less data and the principles? So this is being recorded, and the slides will be made available if you want to go back over this. And, it's all interconnected. So they're not standing in isolation. They influence each other, the wisdom, the worth, and the actual waste in the process in the Earth experience. So let's look at wisdom. So we got truth, we got nature, and we got being human in the process. So under the area of truth, so this is the ones that are classified, and the first ones got the big vote, so they were most likely to be in the top task. So the top task under the area of truth was transparent, truthful, do not mislead, exploit through design. Design light patterns as against dark patterns, designed for transparency, best for the users, best for the planet, and avoid the false economies of free and cheap. In many ways, we think we're in an age of post-truth, or that misinformation has won, or fake news has won. But I think it's never been more important for us to try and establish and maintain truth. And that if we have, truthful design, and it tends to be lighter, it tends to be better, it tends to not promote overconsumption, it tends to not, we are fooling and we are lying not to do good things. Those who mislead, those who mistreat customers, mistreat the environment. Those who exploit customers exploit the environment. It's the same culture. It's the same mindset. Those, who, try to con you, by selling you free stuff, but then you have to download 4.5 megabytes of tracking analytics. The economies, the advertising industry probably has done more to damage the planet than any other industry in history, and that's including the actual oil industry, because it drives that culture of overconsumption, of short-term thinking and superficial wants. And when we look at the engines of big tech, of Facebook and Google, they're not technology companies; they are advertising companies. Facebook makes 97% of its revenue through advertising. Google, over 80% of its revenue through advertising. Google and Facebook are advertising companies that use technology to advertise to us. And advertising is a mechanism of getting us to consume. And if we go back to the first slide, we can't live the way we've lived in the past. There's no easy way out of this climate crisis. And we can't just get renewable energy and go on living the way we lived in the past. We have to radically change our societies. Are we capable of doing that? I don't know. But I think if we don't found it in elements of wisdom and actually being truthful, we have no chance at all. Nature, non-exploitative solutions that reconnect to the earth and to each other, using design to sustain, to heal and empower the earth, and prioritize design's impact on the earth over the intentions of the designer of the organization. So these are enormous challenges that many on the call would say, well, there's nothing I can do. Well, there's always something we can do. It may be something very small, but there's always something that we can do in the process. So non-exploitative, so it goes back to truthfulness. It goes back to avoiding dark patterns in design, in exploitation in every sense of the actual word. And of course, it connects up with human centered devices of those who are directly impacted by the outcomes of the product, service, or the process. We essentially, with technology, are building a modern slave economy. The gig economy is just another name for the slave economy. The people on the bicycles or in the vans, being constantly pressured to deliver stuff faster and faster and faster. The intense cruelty by which Amazon runs its warehouses and Uber treats its actual drivers. If you're exploiting people, you're going to be exploiting the planet. You can't save the planet, be nice to the planet and be horrible to people. People who are mean to other people are mean to nature. It's all part of a character, a worldview, a way of thinking, a culture. So ethical, fair working conditions. I remember once seeing this picture of the Uber offices in London, and they had lots of plush, nice armchairs. And I'm pretty certain it was Uber. If it wasn't Uber, it was somebody like Uber. But outside in the rain were the taxi drivers queuing for their permits or whatever in the process. And that, we get treated tremendously well as the digital professionals, but the workers in the warehouses are being treated essentially as like modern slaves, with their healthcare being taken from them, and this world that we are building. No wonder we are moving towards a climate crisis, and it is driven by technology. Collaborative design, diverse, multidisciplinary, multicultural, multi-experience. There's lots of scientific studies out there that show that multidisciplinary, multicultural science is better science in the process. So the area of wisdom, we're very smart, but we're not very wise in the modern world. We've got lots of short-term IQ, but we're seriously missing on long-term wisdom. So the idea of truth, the idea of taking nature into account and taking the human experience into account. So the next one, I add the word wait here, wait and worth. To wait, to go the opposite of Nike. Don't do it. Take your time, prevaricate. The long term, deep needs and metrics in the process. And again, promote long-term thinking. How do we do that? How do you promote long-term thinking in software design? Well, some ideas might be, documentation, modularization. You can't have software that lasts a long time if you don't have good documentation, so that when that coder or developer moves on, as they will, the new person can understand what was actually created. So I don't know, it'd be great to get into discussions on how do we actually develop long-term thinking. Timeless design, the opposite of fast fashion. Back in the 40s and 50s, they weren't designing perfect products at that time, but there was a wholly different philosophy. It was really in the 50s and 60s that the planned obsolescence really began to sweep the world, and that marketing became the driver of product design rather than actual product designers. So durable, rugged, designed to last, repairable in these issues. So this around the long-term thinking, the deep needs, not superficial ones. And the top task meta that was actually in the actual list, and it was in the overall top task, the yellow and greens. The top task method is actually a method of identifying what truly matters and what doesn't matter in the environment. And don't create. The most important decision is what you decide not to do within a specific process. So this, the area of deep needs. Measurement. So calculate the true and total cost, the cost to the ecosystem, the cost to the earth. So the product that is made, if it has plastic, well, that has a 1,000-year implication or a 2,000-year implication. If it has rare earth materials, and those rare earth materials are not properly recycled, some of those are forever materials, and they will pollute environments. Less than 20% of e-waste is properly actually recycled. So this is a huge challenge. How do we create metrics that go beyond the narrow organizational sense and look at the true and total cost, the long-term impact on the earth? Make usefulness a key metric. It's an interesting one from the idea of deep needs, that we measure the usefulness of something rather than the fact that it is being produced or actually sold. Account for waste at every step from true beginning to true end. So number 1 and number 3, very similar. And digital waste education and training. We really need evangelists in this space. Hopefully some people are watching this and saying, I want to become part of the change, because we really need to grow a movement here to deliver the change. And visualize the waste that digital creates. So I've got lots and lots of materials around most of these points. I'm not going through it today. I'm just giving the actual survey results and the hierarchy of the survey results. But hopefully in future sessions, we look at specific areas. Right? So the final area, the 3 segments, the truth, the worth, and the waste and the weight of things. In many ways, measuring the weight of digital and reducing its weight is one of the key ways we can go to do practical stuff. So maintain, reuse, less data and less energy. So this area is probably, more, here's stuff I can take away and immediately start doing something practical on. So maintain. Everything created must have an owner who is responsible to care, maintain, and delete it. And if there is a manager on this call in a digital environment, I would say or anybody or somebody who might influence a manager. I've been involved in websites since 1993, 94 in the process. And this would be my number one way of understanding is if a website is going to fail or succeed, or if it is failing or successful. Is it a launch and leave culture, or does it have an ownership? Are people responsible for what they've created? Are they maintaining it and deleting and archiving at the appropriate? So ownership is absolutely critical, super critical to creating a more sustainable digital environment, that we take responsibility for our things. And that's not just the data, that's the physical objects, that mobile phone that we have. We make sure that when we're not using it, we either donate it or we give it to a reputable recycler. We don't just leave it hanging around. Continuous improvement, governance, ongoing optimization, that we care, and this connected with number one in the process. Constant review, archiving. So we see how all of these got very strong votes in the process. Maintenance, repair, that's easy and cheap. So this is where, if we're looking for designing for the long term, well, if we want to design for the long term, we need to design things that can be easily taken apart, that can easily be repaired, easily reused, and modular design systems. There's lots of areas. So this is all interconnecting in some ways, and make it work on old equipment, old software. Designing it in a way that it works on the older phones. A whole other world of challenges there. Reuse. There's the number 3 overall top task. Make things easy to be found, reused. Now this is extraordinarily positive to see there was number 3, but it's very doable, but it's doable based on some of the most boring things like metadata, like classification systems, like things that are hugely neglected today. Because if you don't have good metadata, if you don't have good classification, findability is massively reduced. And then if you don't have good documentation and good descriptions of the thing, it's very difficult to reuse the thing even when you found it. So there are solutions to this if we so choose to address them. Before seeking new solutions, look for what is already working. So that's saying to you, go out and see what's out there in the process, not just making your stuff findable, but before any creation, there's good solid research. Think reuse first, creating something new second. So 2 and 3 very similar. Modular, component, standards-based design and creation. So these key issues around reuse. So less energy. How do we deal with less energy? A huge one. I think this is the number 4, number 5 overall. Reduce consumption through design. Change over consumption behaviors. How would we do that? Somebody was talking to me yesterday about that Netflix should have a green option, which says, oh, you want to watch the environmental option. So that's standard definition viewing. That we do design that reduces consumption. That we're constantly thinking about how do we reduce the amount of data people are using? How do we design to reduce consumption, change over consumption behaviors? Enormous challenges. Use renewable or carbon-free energy, and it's not just in the energy that you use. Most of the energy in digital devices is what is called embedded energy. It's the energy that was used to manufacture the actual device. So 80% of the energy, the total energy that a typical digital device will use, it'll have used during the manufacturing process. So was that manufacturing process using renewable or carbon-free energy? Avoid energy wasteful technologies such as blockchain, Bitcoin, metaverse. The new technologies, Web3 is an atrociously destructive, nihilistic, scam, not just on people, but on the actual planet. Their whole models are based on maximizing the use of energy rather than minimizing the use of energy. Minimize energy consumption during product or service use. Making sure we design, if we're responsible for a large website, most of the energy occurs not within our environment, but within the environment of our user. So most of the energy impact is in the 10,000 or 100,000 people who are using it. It's in their homes, on their devices, on their phone batteries that is being sucked by the big web page. Web pages having grown, by orders of magnitude over the last 10 or 15 years, and wholly unnecessarily as well. So really thinking about minimizing energy consumption during the product or the service use. Less data. The final one, again, big challenge connected with overconsumption. Minimize design creation waste, less content, less code, less communication in the process. How do we reduce the content from 1,000 words to 500 words? Because, then it takes half as long to read it. So then it's half as big an impact on people's battery. Less code. We ship huge quantities of JavaScript, and often 80% of it wholly unnecessary in the process. Less communication, less emails, etc. So store least amount of data possible in most energy efficient possible. So saying, constantly asking, do we really need to store this? Do we really need to keep this? And if we need to keep it, how do we keep it in the most energy efficient manner possible? Archiving systems are up to 150 times less energy intense than always on systems. So an archival system versus, say, a Dropbox is much, much more energy efficient. So proper archiving our data can significantly reduce its pollution impact. Give users control of their own data in the process so that they can delete it or amend it. Collect least amount of data possible. We collect far too much data. The vast majority of it we don't need. 90% of data is not used 3 months after it's first stored. Most websites do not need analytics. They do not need tracking. It's just analytics theater for the vast majority of websites. Designed for slower data connections, no data connections in environments. There's ways and means of doing that. And finally, send least amount of data possible. So we send as little as possible. We collect as little as possible. We store as little as possible. And in the creation process, we create as little content, as little code, and as little communication as possible. So here we see the full league table of tasks. So this is being recorded. You'll be able to see the actual presentation later on, and I'll also make the slides available. If you're interested in these broad concepts, I published a book in 2020 called Worldwide Waste. You can find out more about it at jerrymcgovern.com. Also, I'm starting up a kind of an evangelist discussion group that's going to meet about once a month to discuss practical things. How do we do these things within organizations? What sort of tools and tips and lessons learned, etc. If you're interested in that group and joining that discussion, it'll be about an hour every month. Please send me an email at jerry@jerrymcgovern.com.